Queen of England in person. Okay, one. I did one time, two. I did one time, it was back in 1967. My grandparents had taken me and my brother to the World's Fair. It was in Montreal that year, and it was called Expo 67. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden there's a commotion in front of us, and we look up, and there's this monorail, this elevated train that went all the way through the World's Fair Park, and right up there was sitting the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, very prim and very proper. So I saw royalty in person, and you know what? It did not change my life in any way whatsoever. The monarchy has never held my heart and my mind very much. It all seems a bit archaic to me, and maybe that's why the image of Jesus as king in the New Testament doesn't do much for me. There's probably something wrong with my Christian life, as I will be the first to admit. I just don't relate to that medieval idea of a king. Now, the New Testament is chock full of metaphors. So, if one doesn't work for us, it's okay to use other symbols. And we're given another symbol, another metaphor, in today's text from John's Gospel. Jesus said, "You are my friends. I don't call you servants any longer. I call you friends." Now, most of us have heard of the Quakers. And if you're like me, when you hear the word Quaker, what do you think of? You think of a cardboard round box of oatmeal, and on the label there's this smiling guy with a funny hat on. He's the Quaker. That's about all I knew about the Quakers until I was a grown-up. I learned later that the word Quaker itself was actually an insult at first. It was used by the enemies of this religious movement as mockery. One of their first great preachers encouraged the listeners to tremble before the word of the Lord. So their detractors started calling them the Quakers. Well, you know, I'm impressed by some of their customs. They lived very simply. They refused, on religious grounds, to participate in war. And they believe that Jesus has a personal relationship with each one of us. You know what their official name is? Not Quakers. It is the Religious Society of Friends. And there's that wonderful word again, friends. I don't call you servants anymore. I call you friends. Well, if Jesus is a king, he's an upside-down king with an upside-down kingdom. The last will be first, he said. Those who are humble will be exalted, he said. So, if you want to, you can call Jesus the King. You can call Jesus Lord. You can even call him what the Nicene Creed calls him. God from God, light from light, true God from true God. But of all of the images, my favorite one is friend. You know, I was not really very religious as a child. I was dragged to church every Sunday by my parents. And when I thought about God, based on my own experience and the religious training I'd had up to that point, I was either afraid or, more often, really, really bored. But then something happened to me when I was 17 years old. For the first time in my life, I discovered that Jesus could be my friend. Not a boss, not a judge, not a dictator, my friend. And this really touched me. See, I was a kid who didn't like himself very much. But if Jesus was my friend, maybe I could be likable after all. And I was a kid who had a lot of anger and guilt and frustration. But if Jesus was my friend, maybe really deep down I was just like everybody else. And I could maybe rise above that negative stuff with the help of my friend, or as we call it, grace. Obviously, I'm not 17 anymore, as I'm repeatedly reminded. I did end up changing my career plans. I went to seminary, I became a priest, and I have read thousands and thousands of pages of theology. and I have read hundreds of thousands of pages of biblical studies. But you know, really, it still all comes down to having a friend that we call Jesus. I'm sure you've heard that famous old revival hymn, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," and that song's okay. But I like another line from a hymn even better. This is a hymn we sing during Lent and Holy Week. "O sacred head, sore wounded." I love words from the 4th verse of that hymn. "What language shall I borrow to thank thee, dearest friend?" Now, you may argue with this, but I think of myself as an ordinary, sane person. We can have the debate after church. But a spiritual writer once said that ordinary, sane people are in love with the gospel much as one might be in love with a person. Now, I'm not big on institutional Christianity, which may seem funny coming from a priest. I don't care much about ecclesiastical rank or church law, but I continue to be captivated by the friend I met when I was 17 years old, the friend I continue to meet in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. I continue to work toward a church that will become a society of friends. I want to be a friend of Jesus and a friend of his followers and a friend to his whole world, from the birds of the air and the flowers of the field that he so obviously loved, to the sun and the rain that he used in his teaching as symbols of God's love for us all. I want to be a friend, his, yours, and the world's. How about you?